So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to be here. I know it's been a long day for everyone, and so I'm so glad that you are all here to hear me. So I present myself. I am Mark Saila. I'm actually belonging to the Australian team in Sydney, so it's been a long way for me to come here. I kind of cope with the jet lag by now, but we'll see how it goes. So I've been passionate for map and geography in general for a long time. And even though I have only been in Tableau for a year and a half, I really decided to be specialized in this area. And so that's why I got the opportunity today to have a talk. And yeah, I'm very passionate about this, probably as much as you are. So before we actually start, I will just talk a bit about myself a bit more. So I always liked to travel. And it has started when I was a kid with my parents. So we really like to travel together. And then when I would become an adult, I continued to travel by myself. And that was the reason why I always tried to find a job where I had the opportunity to travel. So you may have heard my accent. I'm originally from France. And then 8 years ago, I decided to move to Australia to be able to go around more like the Asian part of the world. So in total, I've been to 35 countries, in all different continents except Antarctica. And I don't know, maybe it's not so popular anymore, but back in the days, people were creating some visualization or something in Facebook to show off a bit, to show the place where they've been. And so I said, I'm working for Tableau now, I've got a beautiful tool. Let's use that tool to build a map where I can show where I've been. So let's play a little bit of a video here, a little demonstration. So what I've got here, I've got a set that contains a list of countries I've been. And for each country, I've put together like the reason why I've been in the country. So it could be for vacation, it could be for work, or it could be where I stay, resident place. And then I tell the number of weeks I've been spending in each location. So very basic data set, as you can see. As you all know, to create a map in Tableau, super easy, just need to double click on my country. Then I will have a dot for each location. And then I can bring the measure in. But what you can see is that I only have two dots, one big dot in France and one other dot in Australia, because they are the places where I've been living. So it's hard to see anything else. If I want to fix that issue, what I need to do, one way is to exclude the place where I've lived. So I can do that in a few clicks, excluding the place where I've been a resident. And now we can see the dots all across the world. You can see there's spending a bit of time in Europe, obviously, but also in Asia, US, Brazil, etc. But there's still one thing I don't really like, is that the dot is a bit put randomly. It's in the middle of the country, which for Australia means that it's in the middle of nowhere. So I'm kind of happy with that, but I think I can do better than that. Let's try to create a feed map. Let's put some color in. So again, a few clicks. I think pretty much everybody here should know how to do that. I will put my measure on the color. Seems a bit better now, right? You can see that I've been covering a bit of places. But there's still a few things I don't like. So for instance, if you have a look at Indonesia, it seems like I've been to all the different islands in Indonesia. And there's many, many there. But actually, I've only been to 3 of them, Lombok, Bali, and Sulawesi. What I don't really like also is that I've been to many small places in Europe, like Malta or Cyprus, for instance, but they're simply too tiny. So there's no way we can see those places. On the other hand, it's hard to miss the fact that I've been to Canada. But in fact, I have only spent 1 week in Canada. So I will stop my little demonstration here. I guess you haven't learned anything special, but it was just to prove my point. And my point is that when you try to build a map, there's a number of mistakes that you may have been doing. And the goal of this presentation today will be to go through the different techniques you can implement, creating some maps. So here we have talked about 2 techniques, but we'll see that there are many, many more. And for each technique, we'll see what is good about them, what is bad about them, and what kind of things we can do. So we'll be going through a lot of different examples. We'll be traveling around the world. So just a little survey here. Can you raise your hand if you're not from the US? Just one time idea. Okay, so I've got like maybe a third of non-American people. So it's good because I try to mix a bit the examples. So most of the examples will be from US, but I will also have examples from Europe, Africa, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's be good. So I want you to relax, sit back, relax, and enjoy because we do a long journey together. Hopefully, I will not be way beyond 1 hour, but I'll do my best for that. All right, so what kind of techniques we'll be seeing here? So we'll start with the basic, symbol maps and field maps. And then we'll be seeing something which is like the name is a bit confusing here, but we'll talk about maps which are actually not map. And we'll see what I mean by that. And then we'll see how you can have map to show density of data, as well as how you can show trajectory and flows. And then we'll finish up with how to put the maps on the top of each other. So I think this session is supposed to be for intermediate people or advanced people, I think. But in fact, we start by the basics. So I think the start everybody will be able to follow. And maybe people that have been using Tableau for a long time might be a bit bored. But I expect by the end, everybody should have learned something. Okay? And if you're a beginner, maybe at the end it will be a bit too fast. But there will be a recording, and you will be able to review it if you like. So shall we start? So first type of map will be the one where you want to show information at one given location. In other words, we're talking here about symbol maps. So I will just take one example here, pretty basic. I am showing the volcanic eruptions all across the world. And in particular, I've been filtering. I only display the places where people have been dead because of these volcanic eruptions. And using this kind of maps, it's very easy to see the places, the patterns. So you can see that like being somewhere in Indonesia, as well as Central America, could be a bit risky, right? So it's what the map are all about, showing this kind of patterns. So obviously this was like the worldwide map, but using these kind of things, you can actually be very, very specific. So you can display location as small as an hotel or a tree, and you can use the city street as a background. So this will be two examples. First one on the left will be the hotel in Las Vegas. So you are in Las Vegas, right? And so the size of the bubble is actually showing the number of rooms there are in each hotel. And I don't know if you see here, it's a bit small, but if you have a look at our current hotel, Mandala Bay, it's actually not such a big hotel in terms of the number of rooms. There's a small dot in the south. On the right-hand side, I was displaying the trees in Manhattan, and it's kind of interesting to see that there are actually a lot of trees in Manhattan. I always thought of it as a forest of concrete, but it seems like they're actually real trees. Okay, so the point is you can display very tiny things. And it's especially true since one of the last versions where you can have vector map and you can really zoom to a very specific location. So you can also use symbol maps to not actually display the actual very precise place, but you can aggregate information on place that will be geolocalized. So for instance, you can capture information maybe at the city level, but then you want to aggregate that kind of information maybe at the country level. So one example would be that. So here what I was showing is the use of drugs or different kinds of drugs across Europe. And I've got 4 maps here with different colors. So we are showing amphetamines, cocaine, opioid, and cannabis. Okay, and you can see that the size of a bubble is different based on the percentage of users. So no surprise here. It's a bit like the US, I guess, much more cannabis users than the other sort of drugs. But here what I wanted to highlight is that you can get information at a very detailed level and then display that kind of thing at a high level. So using symbol maps have a number of advantages. First of all, the size of the geographical zone does not matter. So it does not matter if your dot is very small or if the city is very small. Because in fact what matters is the size of the measure that you will put on the map. Second one, you can actually use this kind of technique for any kind of data. So you can have normalized data, like percentages, like increase, like thing per capita, and you can also put raw data, and it will work in both scenarios. And last, that will be super easy to put multiple variables on that map. Why is that? Because you can use the size, you can use the color, and you can also use the symbol. So in one map, you can put 3 things at the same time. So little remarks here. So we talked about shapes. By default in Tableau, that will be circles. But as you know, you can change. You can put whatever you want. And for instance, in that scenario, I was putting triangle as opposed to circle. And I think it's good to display things like mountains. It's more powerful, I think. Another example is that you can use custom shapes. So this is also a viz I created. So it's a bit of a funny one in terms of title. The idea was to say, where should I go in vacation if I want to maximize my suntan? So what you've got here is that you've got the different locations, the most important cities in the world. And then I don't have the total viz here, but you can filter on one given month. And then you want to see which place is sunny in average compared to the other cities, right? Remember, it's January. So if you go in January, and you can see in Europe, where I come from, it's all gray, all these dark clouds. It's one of the reasons why I left France, actually. It's not because I was fed up of cheese. No, believe me. All right? On the other hand, if you have a look at places like Australia, you've got this beautiful sun. Okay? Las Vegas is not too bad, by the way. So this can be a good way to show things like just of having circle or triangles. Something to mention is that we can also put pie charts on maps. So for instance, here what I'm having is that I've got the number of Olympic medals by country, and then I've got a pie chart where I'm showing the different types of medals, so whether it's a gold, silver, or bronze medal. So this can work to some extent, but you should avoid to do that if you got a lot of points to display, and you should not have, let's say, more than 3 colors, because then it will be very cluttered. Okay, so in Tableau, we are not a big fan of pie chart in general, but we can build them, no worries. What about backgrounds? Is a background always necessary? Has anybody here have heard of Dimmer's cartograms? If you want to show off in society, it's a good term to use. So what is it all about? Basically, you are saying that you want the size of a country to be proportional to the measure you want to show. Okay? And so you can build something like that. So here what we have, each country is nothing more than a square, and the size of the square will show the CO2 emissions level. And no surprise here, you can see the bad guys, China, but also, I'm afraid, America. On the other hand, if you have a look at Africa, it's kind of disappearing in the background because they're not producing much CO2, except for South Africa. Okay? So in some scenario, I think this kind of map can make sense. So that was the thing for our symbol maps. Let's move the gears here. We want to show information on the surface now. And this is what we call field map, also called choropleth map. So an example here, we are showing the birth rates in Africa. And it's very clear with that kind of method to see that there are many more kids, or women are making many more kids like when you are in the middle of Africa, and not so much in the North Africa or the South of Africa. So this is a good method to show these kind of things. So again, we've been very high level at the continent level, but using Tableau, you can be much more specific. So you can display information at the county or even zip codes. For instance, I can display the level of adult obesity by county in California, or I can even show like the income, the average income by zip code in Manhattan. And no surprise here, if you are living next to Wall Street, you are pretty rich. So there are 3 conditions that need to be met before you can use field map. First one is maybe kind of obvious, is that your data should be attached to a surface area, which means that if you are using a custom shape, like by shapefile or by polygon, you will be good to go. You will be okay as well if you are using some of the native Tableau enumeration units. So if you got data at the country level, state level, even county, that will work. On the other end, if you are trying, or if your dataset only contain data with one single lat and longitude by area, or if you want to get the information by city or by airport, Tableau does not know about the shape of those things. So you cannot use a field map. Okay, so this one was pretty obvious, I guess. Second one is maybe not that obvious. This is data should not be, or should be actually normalized. What do we mean by that? So this map here is showing the number of crimes in the US by state. What insight can you get from that map? Okay, seems like don't go in Texas, don't go in California. It sucks, very dangerous place there. But what is wrong about this? So obviously these states are one of the most populous. So there's a lot of people. So what you should display is not this. What you should display is the rate. So you should not display this, but you should instead showing the crime rate. And now we've got a very different story. Now, where is the worst place to live in? Louisiana. Okay? So there's a lot of crime there. And you can see that now California and Texas are not so bad. So using field map, you should display things like rate, things per capita, percentage changes, percentage population. These are all things that make sense. But don't put a measure that can be influenced by the population of the area or the size of the area. And last condition, your data should be continuous, which means that if for some reason you are missing a lot of data points, these are all the black ones, then it's hard to get any information because you cannot see any pattern. So use what kind of field map if you have a pretty complete or comprehensive area with all the dots. So I guess pretty much everybody here knows how to build a map using things like country, state, etc. But maybe not so everybody have used shapefile. Maybe I should do a survey actually. Who has ever used shapefiles in the room? So here, and half of the room. So I'll just go quickly. So first of all, we are supporting a number of formats, as you know. And what I will be doing in my example, I will be opening a tab file. So pretty straightforward, as you will see. So I'm connecting to my data. I am selecting my special file, my file here. And then it will load. And what you will have on the right-hand side, you have a new thing called geometry element, which can be polygon, it can be string as well. And you can bring that to the canvas, doing a double click. And so this is Australia, obviously. And the one thing to notice is that by default, when you do this, you only have one big shape. So if you actually want to actually see what is inside each of the polygons, you need to bring in a dimension to break the other things. So I can bring my dimension, which was like statistical area number 2, and then I'm able to bring a measure onto it. Okay? So bottom line is that when you bring in shape files, by default it's just one big shape. So even though you can see the borders, you cannot actually see the numbers within each borders. So you need to bring in the dimension, which is a bit surprising when you never use these kind of files. So the thing is that when generally you get those files on the internet, so for instance, you go to a public website and you say, I want to get this kind of statistical area, stuff like that. But generally, they don't contain much information. Okay, so they contain a polygon, but they don't contain any measure. So generally, what you have to do is that you want to mix those files with some other files that do contain data. So for instance, what I want to do here, I got a file of the schools in New South Wales, so it's the states where Sydney belongs. And then what I want to do is you see that for each school, I've got some kind of index, which is called the ICSEA, Index of Community Socio-Educational Advantage. So basically, it shows whether people are from a rich background or educated background or from a poor one. And I got the information at the school level. Now what I want to do, I want to use that information so that I can now color my different statistical area based on this particular index. Okay? So how will I mix together both this information. I've got lat and longitude on one end, and I've got geometry or polygons on the other end. So what I will be doing, I will be using what you call a spatial join. How I do this? I will be connecting my text file, CSV, and then I will select geometry on one end, and on the other side, I will create a little calculation, which will be a make point calculation. So I'm sending two parameters to it, the lat and longitude. And now I've got like geometry object on both ends, and now I'm able to use the intersect join. Okay, so this will only be available if you got geometry on both ends. And then, if I'm going back to my sheet, now I've got one single data source that contains measures and dimensions from both data sources. Okay? And what you probably have seen here is that initially I had the map of Australia. Now it just went to New South Wales, one of the states. Why is that? Because I used, I think, inner join. And so I had only school in New South Wales. So the rest has been basically removed. Make sense? So now, let's say I want to put my index. Potentially, I can just drop my index into the map using average. But this will be a bit wrong, in fact, because you've got schools that have more people than some others. So what you need to do, you just need to do a little calculation, like a weighted average, that will factor in the number of students into each school. And then finally, you are able to bring that into your map. Okay, so I don't think anybody else is from Sydney, or maybe there is, but then you'll be not surprised for people that live here. Here you can see the eastern suburb are the rich one, so dark blue here. On the other end, when you live in the west, you're not as rich or not as educated. So something which is obviously very important when you deal with field map is colors, because obviously you can only use colors as the representative attribute. And there are some scenarios where colors do not work. Let's have a look at this. So this map here is showing the GDP per capita. Okay, and you see that there is a scale of green at the bottom. But it's hard to see anything, right? Maybe you can see a bit of light green and black and dark green, but that's about it. So let's try to make it better. First of all, what you can do is that you can change and you can say, I don't want to use an infinite number of colors. I only want to use 5 of them. Or it could be 3, it could be 4. Now it's somehow a bit better. Now you can see that globally the south hemisphere, except Australia, is kind of poor, and the north is kind of rich. But it's still not that great. What else can I do? I can change my palette. And now I've got something a bit better. Okay, now I can clearly see that some countries are red, some of them are orange, and a few of them are like gray or white. But what's wrong here? If you have a look at the legend, we are actually missing all the blues. So according to that map, it seems like the entire world is poor. Right? Strange, isn't it? So the issue has to have a look at the distribution of your data. So how Tableau works, probably obvious, but basically it takes the minimum value, it takes the maximum value, and then it will calculate the gap in between and it will divide in equal parts. But if you are trying to understand the distribution of your data, you'll have something like this in that example. So you can see that you've got a lot of poor country. You've got 26 not very rich country, let's say this way, and then you got a very, very, very few rich country. Okay? So it would be better, I think, if we were able to say, I want to have one particular color for the 20% which are the richest country, then another color to the next 20%, another color to the next 20%, and so on and so forth. And this can be very easily done in 2 clicks. Okay? So what you can do is, instead of putting the measure, which is the GDP per capita, you are actually creating a table calc. And you will say, I want to display the rank of that measure. And so the only trick you need to do next is you just need to reverse the scale. So because you want the country with a high rank to be the one with the blue. Make sense? So fairly easy to do and very convenient. Another option would be to create a calculated field. So you can do something like this, where you can create a calculation where you say, okay, I define my threshold for the country to be poor, average, and rich. And then you just put that and you put your color in. Okay, so just need to calculate what kind of threshold you want to use. And the advantage of that will be that then you can use the legend as a highlighter. So if you click in one category, you actually see the country that match the criteria you got selected. So pretty convenient. So there's still one issue with field map, is that the smaller places can be overlooked. Remember when I was trying to show off and I say, oh, shame that Malta is too small, I cannot see it. And this is particularly a problem if you are trying to answer this kind of question. So if the question is, which one is the richest country? Can anybody try a guess based on that map?
You said Malta.
Which one?
You said Malta.
Malta? No, Malta is not very rich, I'm afraid. Yeah, so your eye should go next to the country which are dark blue. And you can try some guess, and then you can put your mouse around and have the tooltips. And you see that, for instance, Norway is dark, but it's actually number 4 only. Switzerland probably number 5, stuff like that. And you can spend a long time trying to find the one you are looking for. So what will be the best option to answer that question? That will be a very boring bar chart, I'm afraid. So bar chart may be boring, but actually provide what you want, right? What do we have here? Richest country in the world is Monaco, probably because of all the Formula 1 drivers that are living there, okay? Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, Bermuda. And all these countries are very small. I don't know if it's a coincidence or what, but yeah, it happened that that's why they were impossible to see on the map. Make sense? So now, what if we want to show 2 measures at once? So when we see symbol map, it was easy. We have a size, we have the color, we have the shape. When we go with field map, we only have one thing, which is the color. But you've got a solution, which is to create what we call the bivariate choropleth maps. And this will be an example. So that map is basically showing the usage of mobile phone as well as internet in the different countries across the world. So if your country is dark gray, it means that both these things are highly used. On the other hand, if you've got a color like white, it means that both those things are poorly used. And then you've got all the one in the middle. So for instance, you see the blue stuff will correspond to a low or medium mobile usage and a high internet usage. And the country like Canada will feel that kind of condition. Okay? So you can see that you can try to find your way around, but your eyes constantly have to go back and forth in between the map and the legend. So the key thing here is to find a palette that makes sense. And also you need to put measure that makes sense to be compared together. Okay, so if you think there is some kind of correlation, then probably it's a good thing to create this kind of map. So how do you do that? Fairly easy. Basically, you create 2 calculations. So you create one to transform each of the measure into a dimension. So again, you have to think about the threshold. And then you create one that combines both the values. And then you just need to associate color to the different values of your dimension. So again, it's where the challenge is to find the right color. But you can find a lot of examples in Tableau Public or in the internet. Right? So an application of that will be what we call the value by alpha map. So it is technically a bivariate symbol map, choropleth symbol map, but the difference here is that the second variable will be used as an opacity mask. And this will be good to factor in, for instance, the population of the area. So let's take an example here. This is obviously the US, and it is actually the result of the last presidential election in the US by county. Okay, so everybody here knows about the red, Trump, blue is Clinton. So if you have a look at this map, it seems like Trump smashed it, because the only thing you can see is red. You can see a little bit of spots in blue, but that's about it, right? Why is that? It's because actually there's a lot, and actually you know that Clinton has had more voices than Trump. So something is weird here. So what is the reason of that is that basically the area in the middle, which are red generally, they are areas which are very few populated, not so many people around there. So using the technique we've talked about earlier, what we can do is we say, if the population is poorly populated, I want the thing to disappear. I want to be darker. And then you'll have something like this. Okay? So now you've got the better vision. Now it seems much more balanced. And you can see places like California and stuff like that, or East Coast of the US, which is, you can see all the colors, but you don't have so much like in the northwest. Okay? So let's talk now about maps which are not really maps. What are we talking about here? So we talked about thin maps, and we talked about the fact that it's easy to miss small areas. And that might be a problem, especially if you want to use that map as a filter. So it's very cool sometimes to say, I want to create a dashboard with a map on one end. I want to be able to click on a state, and then I want to get the status of information for that state. But what you can see using this, you can see a massive Alaska. But then if you want to see the small outliers, see this red color here? They are from tiny states in northeast. And unless you know your geography very well, it's very hard to see those. So it would be great if every single state will have the same size. And we can do that by creating what we call hextile maps. So hextile map is something like that. Each state is an hexagon, and each hexagon is the same size. And using that kind of technique, you cannot miss any state at all, because they are all the same size. So now you can see the outliers, and you can see that Alaska is just another state like all the others. Okay? So how you recreate those? The only thing you need is a table like this, where you've got a line for each state, and then you will have the location of that state on a x by y axis. So for instance, you can put from 1 to 12. And then what you can do, you can just put that. Basically, you are creating a scatter plot. You're putting the state on the map. And the only catch here is that you need to reverse the y-axis so that the 0 is at the top. That's about it. Then it's just about making some polishing. So you change the size of the shape. And then you have to remove the thing like the axes and borders and stuff like that. So fairly easy. And the cool thing is that you can have your file with your state, and you can reuse it all the time. So just get that kind of file on the internet or wherever, and then you can use for all the measure you want. Okay, so for people which are American, that works. What about the rest of the world? So Europe, for instance. One option here is to create pentagons. So it's another option. So basically now, all the countries are the same size, but instead of having an hexagon, we're having a pentagon, and they've got different orientation. Okay? So it's not super easy to find your country, but if you know a bit your geography, you will end up finding yours. So how will you do this? It's kind of the same logic, but this time, instead of having one row by state or by country, now you've got 4 rows, because obviously a pentagon has 4 corners. So you need to define the location of those 4 corners. And then what will be in Tableau, you need to select the polygon mark type, and you will use basically you need to sequence the points, because Tableau needs to know how to join the points together. So you put the point order into the path. Okay? What about zones with odd characteristics? Australia. What is all about Australia? First of all, there is only 7 states or territory. So creating the hextile will probably not make more sense. Second thing, which is a bit strange, is that we've got a tiny territory, which is called Australian Territory, which is where the capital is, Canberra. So it's like DC in the US, very tiny. So to do these kind of things, probably the best option is to use a tool, like for instance the one from Interworks, where basically you put a map in the background, and then you're using your mouse to draw the shape you want. And you can do whatever you want. You don't have to follow at all the coastline. You can make the thing very different. And what will happen is that on the left-hand side, the system will capture the dots you've been pointing. And then what you can do, you can exactly do the same technique than before. You can use the polygon option and put it, and then you can create something like this. Okay, so this is my map of Australia, and I made ACT much bigger than it is, so that, for instance, I can see the measure which is behind it, or I can click on it when I'm on the dashboard. Make sense? So this can work for any kind of location you want to display. How about showing density of data? So here we see 4 techniques that will address the same thing. So we've got a data set that lists all the tornadoes in the US since 1950. Okay, so we've got the location for all these tornadoes, which is 120,000 records. So first technique we may use is the one called point distribution map. So basically something very easy. Just drag your latitude and longitude, and boom, you've got a dot for each of the each of the location. But there's a bit of cluttering here. You can try to make it better by changing the size of the dots, or maybe by putting a bit of color or borders. But you cannot do any better than that. So what does this answer? Basically, using that kind of technique, you can tell that there is many more tornadoes on the East Coast than there is on the West, but it's very hard to tell the difference, let's say, between Florida and Texas, because it's all white. Okay? So a better option for that would be to use heat map or density map. So it's something that has been introduced in Tableau a year ago, I think. You've got a new mark type called density, and when you use it, basically the color will change based on the number of dots which are on the top of each other. And then again, you can play a bit. You can change the palette, you can change the size, and you can even drag it a measure. So maybe you can say, I don't want to see the number of tornadoes. I actually want to see the number of people that have been injured because of those tornadoes. Okay, now we can clearly see the spots. But there's still one thing I don't really like about that technique, is that when you put your mouse around, you've got the tooltips, you can get the information for one tornado at a time. But you cannot actually tell, I want to know how many tornadoes have been hit that particular location. Okay? So to solve that issue, you will go to the next one, which is creating what you call square bins. So what you want to do here, you want to divide your area into sub-area of equal surfaces, and then you want to color those areas. And then we are able to count, for instance, the number of tornadoes on each given area. So how will you do that? You will basically create a calculated field, which will be the round. You will be rounding your latitude and longitude to the closest integer. Then you will make those geographical, and when you do that, basically you can drag them, and the system will do a map for you. And now what will happen is that you will have like dots first, but then you can change those to squares, make them bigger, and then you can drag a color onto them. To see pretty easy, you just have to round your latitude and longitude. Take question at the end. Sorry. So little issue here is that what if, to show that you can also show measure like injuries. Now, what if I want to zoom on a particular state? So, for instance, I go to Alabama. So what happens is that you see that now I've got small square. So obviously you can fix that by changing the size of the square so that it fills the entire space. But you have lost a bit in precision here. Okay? So if you really wanted to go maybe at the county level, you might end up with only one square. Okay? So what happens is that when you are using the round of latitude and longitude to the closest integer, you are actually creating square of 69 by 69 miles. This will be true if you are at the equator level. If you are way in the north or way in the south, it will actually not be square at all. So it's one of the other limits of using that method. Okay? So what if you wanted to display information maybe at the county level, as I said? One option is to not round to the nearest integer, but maybe to round to 1 digit or 2 digit using this kind of things. And then you can have a map like this. Okay, now I can see that I've got small square for Alabama. But the same issue will happen again if I'm trying to zoom in. Then I will have my small square and will have to make them bigger and etc. So actually, if you really want to be serious about it, the best option will be to create hexbins, which will look like this. So what do you have now? You've got the map of the US, and you've got hexagons, and you can see that all the hexagons are exactly like next to each other. So I will actually not show you how to build this, because it goes beyond what I want to show, but I will just show you how it will look like, okay? And I can give you resources later if you want to know how to build this. So if you've got this kind of map, you can obviously put your mouse around, and you've got the details for every single hexagon. And then if you want to zoom on one state, again, like let's say Alabama, you can see that now you don't have to resize. The system does it for you. And you can zoom. It's perfect. You still have your nice hexagon all over the place. And you also have the option here to have a parameter to change the hexagonal size. So then you can decide that your hexagon might represent a bigger area or a smaller area. Okay? So this is a nice solution if you really want to understand how many tornadoes or how many people have been injured in one particular area. So now next one is probably the last chapter in terms of techniques, how to show trajectory or flow between locations. And you've got different names which kind of tell the same thing. So sometimes they are called flow maps, path maps, spider map, origin destination maps. But in my opinion, what matters is the shape of your data. So we essentially have two scenarios, two cases. The first scenario is the one in which you've got one row by location. Okay, so then you've got basically your data set is the trajectory of the things. So then you'll have one column that will tell how to group your data. So for instance, it can be a tornado name, it can be a train line, etc. Then you've got the sequence or time that will indicate basically how a thing changes over time or what the order you should consider. And then you've got your latitude and longitude. Okay? So then that will be easy to build something in Tableau. You drag your latitude and longitude. Then you select the line, mark type. You will bring in your tornado. Then you got these funky lines, strange lines here. But the line will be fixed as soon as you bring in the date and time. Because then now Tableau knows how to join the thing together. And you can see that there has been a lot of tornadoes indeed, right? So now if you want to just focus on one given year, you can just go back in and you can filter for that particular year. Okay? So pretty straightforward here. So you just need to know that you need to use the line mark type, and then you need to bring the dates or timestamp, if you want, on the path. Two important things here. So then the next question would be which pre-attentive attribute you want to use, because we right now just draw the tornadoes, but we haven't done anything with them. So here we're talking about lines. It's not like we've got thousands of options. We can either use the color or we can use the size. And then you need to decide what kind of question you want to answer. So you can say, maybe I want to use the color and the size to put together to measure. So for instance, I want to use one to show the wind speed and the other one to show the atmospheric pressure. And we'll have something like this. Or I may say, I want to be able, it's important for me to understand what was the path for each single tornado. So then you need to be able to differentiate them, which you can do using colors. Or you may say, I want to understand which month is most impacted by tornado. So we bring the month onto the color, and then you'll have something like this. What if what is important for you is to understand the direction of each tornado? Because right now we were not able to tell whether it was from east to west or west to east or whatever. So you can implement techniques like using the size and stuff like that, but the best is probably to create a dual axis, where basically you will say, I want to put a dot, for instance, either at the start or at the end of a tornado. And now you can clearly tell, okay, this tornado is going from west to east or west or the other way around. And we'll talk in a minute how to create this dual axis. So the other thing we can mention is that for that particular example with tornadoes, it can be cool sometimes to use the page shelf if you really want to understand the sequence of events. And then you've got the option to play a bit with the history, and then you are able to create something like, oops, I missed my one. Okay, I missed my animation, which was the point of it. So normally you see, you see the thing moving. Okay, let me see if I can see that. Yeah. You can see the tornado moving. Okay? Which is kind of cool in a way. Even the tornado are bad things. So the little catch is that when you are using the page shelf, the automatic animation only works if you are in the desktop. So the minute you publish to a server, you need to do the click by yourself because the page cannot refresh by itself, as for now. So that was the case 1, where you had one row by location. The case 2 will be that now you've got, for each row, you both have the source and the destination. So this would be very common if you got things like flight path, or if you got something like migration. So these are my 2 examples here. First one is showing the number of migrants from one country to the other. Second example is showing the most popular routes for the planes. So you see that for each couple of cities, I have a number of flights. So what is different compared to previous example is that now for each row, I've got both the source and location. So how will you deal with that kind of situation? There's 2 options, 2 methods. First option is that you want to transform your data back to the way they were in case 1, where instead of having one row with both source and destination, you want to create one row for the source and one row for the destination. And there are many techniques to do that. One will be to use a union, but in my opinion, the best option is to create a join. I will show you how to create that. So we've got our CSV file with migration. And then what I will be doing here, I will have a little file that contains just the storyline, order 1 and 2. Then I can basically drag that file into my canvas. And what I will be doing here, I will create a full outer join. So I will put something like 1 equal 1. Basically what will be doing this, it will duplicate my rows. So now I've got 2 rows instead of having 1. Next thing I need to do is I need to create one single column that will contain my country or my city. So fairly easy to do, little calculation here. I will say if order equal 1, I will take the source. If on the other end order equal 2, I will take the destination. Next thing I need to do, I need to tell the system that this is actually a geographical field. So I put a role to it, which is a country in that scenario. Then I just need to create a field that will tell the path. So basically I'm saying now I want to merge together the source and the destination. So I put just a basic concatenation. And now, this piece of cake, just need to double click on my country. I got all my dots. I bring the path in. I'll change my mark type to line, like before. So there's just a little catch is that I need to swap around country and path, so something happens sometimes. Now you see that all the migration, so people are moving from everywhere in the world to everywhere in the world. Then if you want to just focus on the place where you've got a lot of migrants, I can say I only want to see the places where you've got more than 1 million people moving. Now you can see there's many less. And then you can put the size, you can basically put the number of migrants on the side, okay? So not a lot of surprise here. I've got a lot of dots or a lot of lines that are converging to the US. So US is an attractive country for migrants. And I've got some kind of things, a bit less, but in Europe as well. Make sense? So that was a technique to how to basically transform your data so that you can use the first technique. So again, the question may be, how can you identify the direction? By using the map we had before, it was hard to see whether people were coming into the US or they were coming out from the US. Okay? So what you can do here, we can use the dual axis as we saw before, but one of the options will be to use the size. So remember now we've got the order, but tell whether it's the order 1 will be the start, order 2 will be the destination. So basically you can leverage that order onto the size. I just have to do a little trick here is that I put minus of the order so that basically the end will be smaller than the start. So it looks like some kind of an arrow in a way. And now you can see that I got my answer. People are going to the US, coming to the US, not the other way around. So that was the first technique. Second technique is possible and it's probably easier to implement, but it has to meet a number of conditions. First condition is that we need to be in a recent version of Tableau, like 2019.2 or above. Second condition, you need to have latitude and longitude. So if your data are not geolocalized, so if you just have a list of city and country, you cannot implement the technique, okay? Yet, at least. So we'll be using 2 functions. One is make point that we talked about earlier. The second one is make line. So how does it work? Basically, you are creating your a number of calculations. First, you are using make point for each of the city. Pretty easy here. Just put the lat and longitude. Boom, you got a point. And then what you'll be doing, we use the make line. So make line is using 2 parameters, basically, which are 2 points things. And then when you've got this, boom, just have to drag this onto your detail, and straight away you have your line. And the cool thing to notice here is that in some scenarios, your line will be curved. What is it? It's called a geodesic line. So basically it shows the shortest path in between locations. And because we all know that the Earth is round, the shortest path is not necessarily a straight line, if you have a look at the globe. Okay? So these kind of things will be good to use, especially if you want to actually show flight path. Like this example here. Then you can see number of people that are, a number of flights actually that are moving. Okay, last chapter, not too bad time-wise. How to put the maps on the top of each other. Map overlays, in other words. So let's have a look at a number of examples. So first of all, you can overlay symbols. So you can show together things like volcanic eruptions and cities. Or you can put together volcanic eruption and earthquake. You want to see where it's dangerous to live. Or maybe, I don't know if it makes any sense, but you can put together casinos and church. Maybe there's a relationship here, I don't know. So this is the example here. This is where in one map, I put volcanic eruption and the earthquake. That can tell you where it's kind of dangerous to live potentially. You can obviously put symbols on the top of field map. So for instance, if you want to show profit number against sales, maybe with different level of details. You can put things like cities on the top of catchment zones, catchment area. And you can even do things like something like that where you overlay symbols on path and lines. So this is cool if you want to show subway or underway lines or train lines, stuff like that. This will be interesting as well if you want to show tornadoes path on the top of symbol. Symbol could be city, and then you want to understand what kind of population might be impacted by a tornado. It's scary here. And you can even put something like, I want to overlay density marks with lines. So what we are showing here is the earthquake along with the tectonic plates. And you can clearly see the relationship here. You can see that the area which are at risk are the one just at the border of each tectonic plate. So obviously there's a lot of application by using these overlay symbols or overlay maps. What about overlay field map? So you've got one map that shows something on the top, one map that shows something at the bottom, and then you can create something like this, okay? So technically this is possible. You will do it using background and transparency and stuff like that, but it's pretty hard to read those kind of maps. So my preference or my advice would be to use the bivariate choropleth map that we talked about earlier instead of using this. So how to build those maps? First of all, for people that live in the US, don't forget that in Tableau, you got the option to use the data layers. So why I'm saying in the US is because at this point of time, we only have data sets or data layers for the US, not anywhere else. If you are not living in the US, or if you don't have a metric you want to show up, then you have to find some other techniques. So let's say we want to overlay symbols. Another example, we want to put earthquake with volcanic eruption on the top of each other. So one technique to do is basically to union your file. So you've got your file here, you create a big union with those, and it doesn't matter whether the attributes do not match. As long as you've got a lat and longitude on both sources, the union will work. Okay? And then what you'll be doing, you know when you create a union in Tableau, it does create something automatic, it does create a path dimension. It basically tells what is the source of each row. And then you can leverage that path, you can drag it to the color, and you can drag it to the shape, for instance. And then you can bring something like this. So very easy. And the cool thing about it is that with that technique, there's no limit to the number of layers you can put. So you can merge together 10 different files with 10 different symbols, and it will always work. And it's just like a matter of cluttering thing, but technically there's no limit. So what about the other situation where you want to overlay field map with symbol map, or you want to use line with symbol, etc.? In all these other situations, you need to use the dual axis technique. So again, I think people here probably are quite advanced with Tableau, so I will be pretty fast with it. But the idea is that basically you are cloning your lat, and then you end up by having two maps. And then the cool thing about it is that then they are kind of independent. So you can only decide what kind of symbol you want to use. So you may say I want to use field map for the first one and symbol map for the second one. And then you can also change like things like your level of detail. So the first one will be by country, second one will be by city, and you can change size, or you can decide whatever dimension or measure you want to bring in. And then, boom, just have to select the dual axis, and they will be put together. Okay? So this will work pretty well if you got one single data source. What if you have more than one? So what if we want to overlay a shapefile that contains polygons along with maybe a CSV file that contains a set of location by, like we say, there are schools here, by latitude and longitude. So actually saw how to do that is the technique we talked about earlier with the make point and with intersect. Okay? So just again, a little bit of caveat here is that you have to have a recent version because intersect's been introduced in 2018.2 and make point in 2019.2. So if you've got an old version of Tableau, you have to migrate. And the other question we have here is that if your polygons are intersecting, there's a risk of having data duplication. Because what will happen is that if you got a symbol which is in more than one shape at a time, more than one polygon, it will actually duplicate the points, and then your measure will actually be wrong. So then what you need to do, you need to create something like a min or a max, or even sometimes a fixed LOD to fix the situation. Okay? I'll take a question at the end, sorry. So something I haven't mentioned here is that the intersect function can only be used if you are dealing with polygon on one end and point on the other end. But there are some scenarios where you've got something else. So for instance, here what I've got, I don't have a polygon, I've got a line string. Intersect will not work, at least for now. But are you stuck completely? No, you're not stuck. There's always a way. Okay? So again, little catch here. The catch is to create a full outer join. So we'll be saying, I want to take both my sources. And what you can do is that basically if you don't want to have lots of lines, you will create a condition which is never met, like 0 = 1. So in a way, it's like creating a union, but except that it's a join. So union with limitation will be that you cannot union shapefile, for instance. Using that technique, you can join everything you want. Okay? And this will work. Last example, I think. What if you want to overlay data that has been geolocalized by Tableau, like basically you've got information at the city or country level, along with data for which you got lat and longitude? Because what is the issue here is that on one end, you've got lat generated, and the other end, you've got just like a proper custom latitude. So this is possible again, and we'll show you how to do that. So first, you'll create your full outer join so that you have one single data source. Next, you will create the map with your cities. Then you will create basically your dual axis thing, so you duplicate your latitude. And here is where is the catch now. So first, for the second map, you will change the mark type to line so that you can see your path. And then what you need to do is, where is the catch, is that you need to bring your latitude and longitude to the detail. And by using this technique, the system will be able to build the line. And you see at the top of the screen on the rows, you've got the latitude generated, but on the detail, you've got the actual latitude and longitude for each path or each dot of the path. And then last, you have to use the dual axis option. Okay? So it's pretty flexible. So last, what if we need to have more than 2 layers? So we saw that it was possible for if you want to put like symbols on the top of each other, but it's not possible for all your situations where you have to use dual axis. But there's still a way. Basically, you can use a floating, you can create a dashboard and basically put the sheets on the top of each other using floating option and using transparency. So it does work, but it's very tedious to do. Okay, because it's very hard to have your maps aligned perfectly. And second of all, the zoom cannot be used. Because if you basically zoom, you will zoom on one layer, and your layers will be out of sync. Okay, so it can work in very particular scenario where I just want to make something which will not move at all. Maybe one day in Tableau we'll have more dual axis option, but at this point of time, you can only do this one. Okay, about time now. So we saw lots of different techniques here. It was hard to cover in 1 hour. But the cool news is that it's not quite ready yet, but my intent will be to put all those examples here on my Tableau public page so you'll be able to download them. And so if you have to remember 4 things from that session here. First one is that, first of all, you need to think about what kind of question you want to answer. It's true in Tableau for everything, but it's also true for maps, obviously. Second thing is that the maps are not always the best visualization type. So even if your boss is saying, I want to have a map, if the question is, I want to know what is the richest country in the world, or the poorest, etc., that the map will not be the best option. Third, the technical possibilities are nearly endless. So there's always some catch and techniques that you can implement by doing like full outer join or union and stuff like that to build what you want. So just look around and you can find options. And last, something I haven't talked too much today, but you have to spend a bit of time on the styles and layers of your map. So if your map is showing, for instance, information at the country level, there is no point of showing the borders of the state. So remember to remove the layers you don't need. So that's about it. So hopefully you have learned something today. So think about maybe what you've been doing at your workplace, maybe some technique that you didn't know, or maybe some mistakes that you've been doing. And if you learned something, raise your hand. Thank you. Not pretty good. So much.